So again, my name is Bill Sheridan. I'm with a company called Advanced Marketplace, CSO for the company. My contact information you should see on the screen, my email and my phone number. So if at some time after the presentation you think of some questions or would like to reach out to me about some specific needs that your company may have, then please use my contact information. So today's session is called Service and Support Modernization. It's really to change or not to change. That's not the question. And the reason why it's not the question is because in today's environment, every organization needs to be thinking about changing the way they deliver services and support externally and internally for their company. So the question really isn't should I change, should I modernize, but what should I modernize, when should I do it, and how do I go about it? And that's the impetus of the that's not the question point. So what I really want to do is almost take us through a walkthrough time. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is start with just a look back. If you look at the last 15 or so years of IT service management and what's happened in the industry, there's been some good things that have happened and some things that have really kind of left a lot of clients today in a tough spot. And so if you see the quote there, everybody's heard this one's pretty common. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. That's pretty important because, to be candid, I think over the last 5 or 6 years, as customers have found themselves in difficult positions with their IT service management solution and have decided to make a change, in some cases we've seen a number of clients who have gone down a road where they're starting to recreate some of the same challenges that they were so desperate to get away from. And we want to make sure that clients have a better plan to avoid that. So if we look at, again, the last 15 years or so and what's worked and what hasn't, there's been a number of things that have been really, really good in the IT service management space. And right at the top of that list is the impact of ITIL. And if you can be a company that prescribes wholeheartedly to ITIL and thinks it's fantastic, wants to implement every ITIL process, or you can be a company where ITIL is a 4-letter word, don't want it too difficult, think it's bunk, whatever the case may be. The reality is that ITIL has brought some stability and predictability to IT service management. And even if you're somebody who says, I don't really use ITIL, you can't get away from using at least some of the main tenets of ITIL. So it's been able to put some framework and some structure around some of the most common things that every organization does in how they deliver service and how they support their customers. And that's been really, really good, particularly in the U.S. over the last 10 years. Some other things that have been really good is that more progressive clients have expanded their services beyond just IT, and we'll talk a lot more about that as we talk about modernization and what it means. There have been maturity models so that clients can start to lay out a plan of where they want to go to with their organization, and they may start in firefighting and reacting and just trying to get people productive and eventually move toward being more proactive with changes and so on and so forth. So those have been really good. Another really big enhancement or improvement over the years of ITSM has been the concept of employee self-service. And that's been rapidly accelerating, especially here in recent years, as customers have gotten more comfortable with consuming technology. Service level objectives, being able to measure success and apply some analytics and success criteria to how you deliver service, all those things have been very positive for IT service management. However, with the good, there is some bad. And some of those things I have here listed on the screen. So as an organization, starting, say, to put your help desk in place 10 years ago, 15 years ago, perhaps even further than that, the process early on was very technology driven. It was about ticketing. It was about what can I log in a ticket? How much data can I take out of a long free text form and put into fields so that a database could capture it. And so it became all about the technology and not necessarily having a strong focus on the business. The reality is, over those years, especially the players who have been in the business for many, many years, they've had to try to find ways to create additional revenue streams. So over the years, some of the players their licensing's become very confusing, very complex, because the only way that they could generate new revenue was to create add-on functionalities. And then we have the terminology. Some people call it configuration, tailoring, customization, coding, whatever the case may be, and that's been a real hornet's nest and a challenge for many, many organizations. And as we look back, that isn't necessarily that it started out as a bad thing. If you go back 15 years ago and where the technology was and the solutions that were available, in some cases, the companies that were the most progressive didn't have a choice but to configure and tailor and customize the solution to get more out of it. But obviously, as we know, that's left a lot of customers today in difficult situations when they try to upgrade, when they try to add new functionality, when they even just try to manage the costs of the solution. So those are things that haven't necessarily been beneficial in IT service management. And then there's a couple others there. I mean, consulting being another one that we'll spend some time on today. So I think it's important to do that look back before we start looking at present day and where the industry is going, because some of these things that are negatives are the things that if we do it right and we don't repeat history, we're going to hopefully fix in the process. And so let me take a minute to talk about IT consumerization, because in essence, this is really the reason why Advanced Marketplace feels modernization is so important. And this segment of the presentation is something that I speak to often, and I incorporate it in a number of different topics that I speak on, because it is so compelling and so important to the way organizations operate today and fundamentally how they deliver service and support to their internal and external customers. And so I'm sure everybody here on the phone has talked or heard about the term IT consumerization, or the consumerization of IT, sometimes it's called. And what that means to me and to our company is the organizational layers between IT and the customer are rapidly disappearing. And what I mean by that is, traditionally, again, if you go back, IT was a technology enablement organization that was intended to keep workers productive and keep their technology tools up and running so that they could do whatever their job was. But the reality is, over time, that's changed, because technology is now the fabric at which all businesses and all industries transact business, generate revenue, and spur growth. So because of that, we have to look at things a little differently. And so I want to look at some of the key pieces of what's bringing about this IT consumerization. So the first one is technology. None of this is going to be unknown to anybody. You know, the explosion of the web, and I use online shopping as an example, but just the web itself and Google and people's dependence and where they go online for answers, for anything they need today. One of the first impulses is to go online, and some of the enhancements of Web 2.0, which have made some really slick functionality available over the internet. Explosion of cloud services and folks like eBay and Amazon, and even within our own industry, Salesforce.com, who's been probably the most successful SaaS company in history. And then even more recently, you look at the explosion of mobile devices and smartphones and the apps that are associated with those, and how prevalent those are, not only today for us, but when you look at the future generation and how young the younger generations and even kids these days are consumers of data and technology. It's really, really changing things very quickly. And what's probably just as key as the technology is really our relationship with the technology, and therefore, because of that, our relationship as a business, as an organization, as an IT group to the customer. And so we've seen some things change because of that technology. Frequent upgrades. You look at particularly if you look at smartphones, there's just constantly apps are getting these small upgrades with new features and new fixes and bug fixes. So it ties into this new thought process and culture where we need things fast. We don't want to wait on stuff. That on-demand type of culture that we've come to live in. Social media is another one. I can't understate or overstate how huge the impact of social media has been on organizations today, and the expectations of service levels from customers because of these types of things. So what I want to do is just talk about just a few examples, a few industry examples, because I think this is important because most people, they have their smartphone, they have their apps, for example, today, and they do things really different. They may go shop for clothes differently. They may go register at their university differently. They may go about looking for a new home differently. Whatever the case may be, people do a lot of things differently these days because of this technology. But what most people do, even people in our own industry, we don't necessarily think about the impact of the company or the organization that's delivering that application to us now. What did they have to go through? How did they have to transform their business and their go-to-market strategy? And what was ultimately the impact to their organization to be able to keep up with that? And so I want to really talk about just a few of the examples here. So these logos are really, they're intended to talk about industries. They're not necessarily specifically to call out these companies, but just to draw you to some industries. So, and I'm going to talk about eBay first. So eBay, a technology company, right? .com company, one of the most successful .com companies to come out of that boom. Most people perceive eBay as cutting edge, right? The technology .com company, and yet eBay today is struggling with keeping up with the rapid changing of technology. Today, more than 60% of items put up for sale on eBay occur through smartphones. And so literally in the last 2 years, within the last year rather, eBay has put out 2 Android update apps that have broken their app. In both cases, I actually received a generic apology email from eBay talking about the fact they broke the app, they had to roll it back, sorry for the inconvenience, and then here even recently their internet went down. And so when you look at those things and you think about a company who 60% of their potential revenue is happening through apps, and the app that has, or the OS that has 85% of that market share, you've broken it twice. eBay is struggling with developing those apps, supporting those apps, and rolling them out on all these new platforms. And it's important for them to get that right because it's so crucial to their business. You can look at banking. I mean, Bank of America's up there, but online banking. Everybody here on the phone, I'm sure, uses an online banking app. If I was doing this presentation live, normally I ask people how many people do online banking apps, and everybody raises their hand. I actually prefer using online banking apps on my smartphone because I think it's even easier than the computer anymore. You look at Hulu, Netflix, companies like that, the whole idea of streaming TV, watching TV and movies and music on demand has transformed actually how cable companies are having to do their business. So today you're seeing more cable companies offer more services than ever because of folks and technology companies like Hulu and Netflix that are putting undue pressure on them to innovate and to provide higher levels of service than ever before. Now, I put Uber up here. It's one of my favorite examples. So when I started talking about Uber 6 months ago, most of the people, when I would have these conversations and do these presentations live, a lot of them hadn't even heard of Uber. And yet today, just 6 months later, everybody, when I ask, knows of Uber. Most people use it. I use it very often when I'm traveling. And yet the taxi industry was completely caught off guard by something as simple as an app that came out and was able to take people with a car and a smartphone who could take GPS coordinates and provide a higher level of transportation service potentially than a cab. So with Uber, you can potentially look up multiple choice of cars, select the car you want, wait a minute or two, and be in your ride rather than having to wait for a taxi, which may take 20 or 30 minutes depending where you are. So regardless of what happens with Uber, because there's all kinds of regulation and political jockeying and stuff like that going on with companies like Uber and Lyft and the taxi lobby, the reality or the most poignant piece for us to think about is the fact that the taxi industry, which most people would think was one of the least technology-dependent industries out there, was literally impacted. The numbers for New York City, last time I looked, was the revenue for taxis in New York City was down 38% because of Uber and Lyft. That's a tremendous amount of money when you think about that has share shifted from the taxi industry over to these smart app type companies. So it's the kind of stuff that organizations, regardless of what industry you're in, have to be aware of, because as an organization, if you're not thinking about how do I modernize the way I deliver services, the way I support my team, how do I align my IT role with the business that we deliver, then you stand the risk of being replaced or overtaken by competition. So real quick before I move on, the bottom logos are just some really cool ones that I thought are kind of out of the typical consumer business space. So if you look at Kickstarter.com, that's crowdfunding. So I don't know how many people are familiar with crowdfunding, but you can go to Kickstarter.com. If you have a really cool idea, or you want to bring a product or an idea or an app to market or whatever the case may be, if you got people who think that's a really good idea, they will actually help fund that in exchange for early releases of the products and so on and so forth. And so there's some really neat ones out there. The coolest cooler is a video I usually show where a guy was trying to raise $1.5 million to help get his cooler off the ground, raised $13.5 million, and overnight, Igloo and Coleman and Yeti have a new competitor in the market. That could have never happened that quickly, that efficiently before things like social media started happening. Pinterest as well. I can cite you an example of a company that was making socks, believe it or not, making socks, designer socks, doing about $1 million a year in sock business. They were one of the number one photos on Pinterest for 2013. Boom. Nordstrom puts an order in for 50,000 units of socks, of their designer socks that sell at like $35 a piece. So just the day and age that we're in is extremely exciting, but it's extremely disruptive to every industry, and it's important for IT and service and support in particular to modernize. So before I just take a quick break to make sure we don't have any questions that I need to address, I want to talk about the future because things aren't slowing down. I won't spend a lot of time on here, but for anyone who does any research on kind of what's coming down the pipe, the Internet of Things, you'll hear a lot of conversation around Internet of Things, and that's just really just IP-connected devices, and they're already out there today, but there's going to be an increased proliferation of them. And when you start thinking about things like already I got on there self-driving cars. You've got cars that are now, or car manufacturers who are going to start installing Android inside the cars. You have appliances and televisions that are connecting to the Internet. All these things are Internet of Things. They're additional intelligence and data and things that will have to be supported and services delivered to as we move forward into the future. Internet by balloons, one of my favorite ones. Google's experimenting with a business where they can actually launch Wi-Fi capabilities in little hot air balloons into more rural areas of the world and be able to bring those customers online and potentially consume Google services. And there's a number of others there. So what I am going to do just briefly is take a breath and see if we have any questions so far. And I don't believe we have anything right now, so I am going to move on. All right, we're going to go through here. And we're going to move over to our company. So just a little bit about our company. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I think it's important. I'm about to really go deeper into service and support modernization, why it's important, what an organization should be doing. And if I'm going to do this and talk to you about the subject and make some recommendations to you, I think it's important that you understand who I am, who my company is, and where we are in the industry, so that you're hopefully taking maybe some advice from a sound source. So Advanced Marketplace, we start our 18th year in business this October. So right now, we literally just started. Been on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list. And we have been in the IT service management space for essentially all of those 18 years. And we've expanded and grown over the years, but our ITSM expertise dates back to the beginning of Advanced Marketplace. And the services that we provide today are really all around modernization strategies, and I'll touch base on that. But you see there some of our partners, Sharewell, HP Software, Symantec, because we feel like all of those partners and vendors have some good solutions and some really good elements that lend themselves to an organization who has a modernization focus. So our company focuses in three areas: service and support modernization, which is legacy ITSM. You notice I don't say ITSM when I talk going forward, because it really needs to go beyond IT anymore. Application modernization, which is all around how we design, develop, test, release applications. How do we secure them? And then obviously the client, mobile, and again, moving forward into the Internet of Things. And the reason why we pick these three areas is because, quite frankly, we don't feel as we go forward in the industry with the convergence going on that you can really separate these three. There's a fabric that's starting to be woven where every organization is going to have to develop a plan that incorporates aspects of all of these into how they go forward with their business. So with that being said, who are we from an IT service management space? We are on the Forrester inaugural ITSM consulting company Wave. Forrester recognized us as a strong performer. You see us there kind of overlapping with another one of our competitors. We were very happy to be on this Forrester Wave. It was based on market presence, went through a pretty lengthy evaluation process. But I think the thing that we're most proud of with respect to this wave is the fact that they have a category called Legacy for Modernization Strategy, and it's really around how do you help clients move from old ITSM legacy technology onto something that's going to equip them, enable them to succeed in the future. And specifically in that category, although we did well in all the categories, in that category, we received the highest score possible, and it makes sense because that really is where our focus is with our customers. So enough about Advanced Marketplace. Hopefully that lets you know that the experts say we're experts and gives some validity to some of the things we're about to talk about. So I've talked about kind of how we've gotten to where we are today from an IT service management perspective, and I've hopefully talked to or convinced some folks about the importance of thinking differently given all the things that are happening with the consumerization of IT. And so if I've accomplished any of the goals there, then really the next step for any organization is you need to analyze the present. You got to understand your current state, because if you want to build a plan toward modernizing the way you deliver service, do support for your organization, you got to have a starting point. The starting point is, where are you today? And that really means, how do we find the places within our current service management infrastructure that are squeezing dollars in our organization, that are making it tough for us to do the job more effectively, to expand what we can do. And really, I try to break that down into 3 different areas. And the first area is the process side of things. It's important for organizations to make sure that their processes are well defined. In today's day and age, more than ever, those processes need to be delivering value to the business. I do a whole presentation around a practical implementation to a CMDB, and the main message of that CMDB is don't worry about how many CIs you have in your CMDB. Find critical services that you support and go figure out how to map those critical services. And if you only do 5 services but they add value, that's better than having 50,000 CIs. And the same is true from a process perspective. You've got to make sure that your processes are delivering value to the business, because remember what we talked about. The organizational layers between IT and whoever your customer is, they're disappearing. So IT's importance for driving value is now more important than ever. Got to make sure those processes are well defined. They've got to follow, they should follow some ITIL or best practice model, because that helps make them repeatable and measurable. And it's important that your processes don't hinder progress. Don't hinder getting work done. The reason why process is important is often we find customers, clients, who are ready to throw out a tool and blame their current tool. They want to throw that out and say, oh, the tool doesn't work, it doesn't meet our needs. And when we dig in a little bit deeper, the root of the cause is sometimes can be process related, not necessarily tool related. So you got to look at your processes and make sure that they're delivering value to the business. The other piece, and probably the most often overlooked piece rather, is looking at your current implementation and administration requirements of your ITSM solution. And this is really kind of the piece that connects your process and your tool together. Because if you have a fantastic tool that's got all the best bells and whistles and is a perfect tool to bring you into the future, but it's implemented poorly, you're never going to be able to get the value out of it that you want. You really need to start looking at, is there a significant amount of customization in that tool? I mean, did it cost you a lot, perhaps unnecessarily, to get that tool to the state it's at today, hopefully delivering what you need it to deliver? Have you created functionality that now is no longer used? So often we find customers they'll find out, oh, I can do this, I can do that, and they implement that stuff, and they bring that stuff into production, and then 3 months, 6 months, 9 months later, no one's even using it, and it's just code and weight and expense that gets dragged along in the system along the way. Probably one of the most important ones here is the product resource intensive and complex to do system administration? I mean, do you have to have folks who have very in-depth knowledge of the tool because it's borderline coding to be able to just do system administration and basic things? And if it is, that's a red flag, that's a problem. And then the last one is bastardized modules and features. And what I mean by that is, have you taken the tool and you've wanted to do some really cool things outside of IT, which is a great thing, and we'll talk more about that, but have you had to break the tool and break the implementation to be able to get those features or be able to provide that business functionality if you want? Because if you have, then maybe that wasn't the best approach. And then finally, we're going to look at the tool or tools that you're using. And this is really taking a hard look at the vendor as well as just the tool, because it's important you can learn a lot about the tool you're using based on just what the vendor is doing with that tool in the marketplace. So, if you can understand what's their investment in R&D. Are they coming out with updates and new features that are keeping pace with the rest of the industry? Maintenance costs. It's one we're going to talk about here as we talk about modernization, but a lot of legacy systems are extremely expensive just for year-over-year maintenance. And so if you are paying six-figure maintenance contracts, for example, and yet you're not having a tool that keeps pace with the industry for feature set, you really got to start asking yourself, well, maybe this tool is part of my problem. The architecture. Does the product architecture make upgrades costly and difficult? And I want to pause on this one for a second because I don't want folks to think that I'm saying that any of the systems that have been around for a long time are just bad. I mean, the systems that have been around for 15 years, 10 years, 12, 20 years, whatever the case may be, they have provided a lot of value, and they have brought thousands and thousands of customers into today's IT service management space. The challenges sometimes that those companies have with that architecture is they do have hundreds or thousands of customers, and it becomes difficult to keep up with the architectural advancements without potentially alienating your company, or your customer base rather. So you have to weigh those things when you look at the tools you're on, and is that something that's happening to you, and is it important? Look at the analysts. Go to the, I mentioned Forrester and what they think of us, but go to Gartner, go to Forrester, go to IDC. They all have fairly consistent views of key players in the industry and the strengths and weaknesses of each of those. And they may vary a little bit here and there, but they're certainly a good source. And then probably one of the best gauges for a vendor, for looking at a vendor, is, are they adding new customers, or are they living off their maintenance base, right? If you've got an organization who's adding new customers to their solution, new logos every quarter over quarter, year over year, that's great, because that feeds the first point, which is they're probably going to be investing in R&D more. If they're not, well, that's a reason to show some concern and need to dig deeper and figure that out. So once you've done that and you've looked at the present, and you have a good handle on the places where, as an organization, you're strong and doing things well, the places where you have some concerns, you have cost creep or cost leakage potentially, where there are places where you could be doing better, you could lower expenses. Once you have that, you really need to know then, or understand, where the industry is going. Because you see there where I say, how did we get here again? What we don't want to do, as I touched on in the beginning, we don't want to repeat history. So we really need to know, where is the market going? So to take a closer look at that, if you look at what the analysts are saying, where technology is driving things, where most progressive customers are trying to take their business, there are a number of recurring tenets that come out that say these are the things that you're going to see vendors incorporate more and more of into their service management solutions. And again, I drop off the IT. It's a service management solution now, because we're trying to get enterprise service management. So the first concept is portability. And portability just means, as a vendor, you have the same solution whether you want to run in the cloud or whether you want to run in the premise, and you give the customer that choice. And so today, the vendors are all over the board there, as far as some do, some don't, some have multiple solutions. And so you have to weigh out for your organization, is that important? Is there a time when I may want to move my cloud solution back in-house, or vice versa? So portability is something you have to consider. Extensible platform. That's another one that is where the market is going. As we move beyond IT service management, as we look to align the technology services we provide with the business role the organization exists for, we want something that's a platform, so we don't have to bastardize or break the solution if we want to bring in HR, for example, or we want to bring in facilities, or we have some clients, university, for example, who's built an entire student admission system that started out as their IT solution, and they've expanded, and they were able to do that without breaking the solution they had, because it was a platform. Codeless configuration is another one. That is one of the ones that I will tell you right now probably has some of the most steam and some of the most adoption already. There are a number of vendors out there already that have some level of codeless configuration, and this is really trying to get customers and clients and users away from that age-old problem of having a solution that's so tailored, that has so much custom proprietary code or so much JavaScript in it that it now becomes unwieldy, difficult to upgrade, super costly. Whenever you want to do something, you're dependent on developers. The industry is absolutely moving away from that. They are moving toward a codeless configuration where you can drive the ability to make changes into the system to your process owners and to your business process folks and not necessarily need developers for all that stuff. Modern architecture, right? It's got to be web-based. It's got to be easily upgraded. Regardless of changes, you can now keep the code easy to upgrade. Native mobile functionality is absolutely imperative. Today's solutions that most effectively equip you for modernization have native mobile functionality, preferably iOS and Android. But it should not necessarily have to be a third-party product. It should be into the product. It should be core functionality, because obviously smartphones and tablets, every IT person's got them. Analytics, we're seeing a real focus on analytics and being able to deal with the data, structured and unstructured, in a way to pull out useful information about the service levels you're providing and how to improve on them. This concept of social IT is another one that's starting to get a little bit of momentum, and the theory there is that in some way, shape, or form, how do I allow end users to collaborate in ways that help them potentially solve their own issues even before IT can get to them, but still allow IT to capture that activity and use that and consume that to help others in the future. And so there are a number of vendors out there who have their own versions of social IT, and they've all taken different spins on it. But it's something that's going to kind of definitely grow and coalesce and take some more definitive form as we go forward. And then the last one is simplified pricing model. And this one's really being driven by the analysts. The analysts are putting pressure on your traditional ITSM vendors to stop making the pricing so complex, and to the point where they're dinging vendors on their magic quadrants and on their waves and stuff like that if their pricing models are complex. They're wanting to be simple. They're wanting people to understand what their maintenance bills cover, what they pay, those types of things. So once we've looked at where you are presently and we understand where things are going, it's all about building the strategy that says, how can I take where I am today and get ahead of the curve? I want to be one of those companies that I can provide services and support to my organization that helps deliver value to the customer. I want to be one of the disruptive companies who jumps ahead of the others. And as an IT organization who's sitting at the hub of potentially internal and external customers, the service desk is the natural hub for most organizations to be able to take that and then expand outward. So what you're looking at here is kind of a graph that we've developed, Advanced Marketplace has developed, where what we've tried to do is just take, based on our experience, some different industry sectors and place them on a graph that kind of shows where we found these organizations tend to sit in the context of moving toward a true modernized service and support strategy. Now, this is obviously not to say you may be a financial services company and be over in the far right, and that's great, but in general, this is where we see folks. And so what you see, particularly if you look at like financial services and retail, and then to a lesser degree the utility side, is some companies or some industries like financial services and retail have been very progressive. They've been willing to get out there and do things beyond traditional IT. In some cases, that was driven by things like regulatory and compliance issues, whether it be PCI or otherwise, or utilities. It could be something in the utility industry for regulation. So they've been willing to stretch their organization, and so as you move up that, up the graph, it means you're stretching beyond traditional IT, and as you move from left to right, you're getting away from heavily customized dependency on outside resource to more of an in-house, lower cost of ownership type strategy. So for the folks who are over in that left-hand side of the graph, particularly in the upper left, what ends up happening is folks in that industry, what we find is that they have these legacy tools that are extremely expensive. They're so dependent on coders that they've lost their ability to be agile and move very quickly. And sometimes they find themselves in a situation where they feel like they can't move because they have so much invested in this tool, or because they just think it'll be too hard. And then we look at folks, when you look down toward the bottom half of the graph, these are folks who, for whatever reason, they're lacking some maturity, and that may mean that they're only doing ticketing, or they're only doing incident management, or it may even mean that they're doing many of the ITIL processes, but that they're not leveraging some of the automation and some of the tools that they could to get the most out of their tools. And so what we find in this area, in this sector, is that immaturity, that delay in kind of moving up the stack causes a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of cost, wasteful spending. So first of all, you have a tool that probably is capable of doing way more than you're leveraging it for, but you're spending money year over year to upgrade it and pay maintenance and all for it. And one of the most interesting things we see is when we have organizations in this area, traditionally we find that they buy something to solve a specific need or specific pain. And then what we uncover is that they end up having multiple redundant systems inside their organization to solve the same or similar problems. So you may have an organization that has 2, 3, 4 different help desk vendors. They may have 2, 3, 4 different discovery tools that are doing inventory and patching. It's very, very common, particularly in the least mature or the lesser mature industries and clients. And that's not to say that everything, if you stay to the right, is all roses either, because there's a balance. As an organization, and I show manufacturing and then the K through 12 over there in that kind of not necessarily highly customized but immature area, if you don't get progressive enough and deliver more to your business, the risk you run is potentially outsourcing. Certainly there's a perceived lack of value from IT, and that's something that IT has struggled with for years, is people complaining, well, IT, the support they give us is horrible, we don't even know what they do. And a lot of times you'll find that with companies and organizations who may have been very prudent in how they went about tailoring their tool, but to a point where they didn't take advantage of the tool. So as you build your strategy is obviously to get you to the upper right, which basically means I want to be progressive, I want to move beyond IT, I want to deliver value to my business, I want to do it in such a way that I don't cripple myself with heavy customization, heavy cost of ownership. And that's really where your strategy starts to take shape. Here's where I am today. Here's where the future is going. How do I take those two elements and build my plan to get me to that upper right quadrant? So, what our organization can do, what I would submit to everybody on the phone, you need to build that plan. If you just say, okay, well, we want to do these things, we want to leverage portability, we want to leverage codeless configuration, but you don't have a plan, if you don't know the pieces that you need to fix in your current state, you again run the risk of ending up right back in the same spot. So you need to have balance. You need to strike a balance between the tactical things that are needed and the strategic things that are going to deliver the most value to the organization. So on a tactical level, you may have a new module. Maybe you're bringing on a new ITIL process. Maybe you're finally pulling problem management out from incident management, very IT-centric. Well, you may have to do that, and so that needs to be in the plan because you may have to be able to do those metrics and report up through management for that. You may need to do an upgrade just because flat out your version's about to go out of support. Maybe your company did an acquisition and now there's another company coming in and you integrate their tool with your current tool till you can retire theirs. All those things are tactical things that need to be accounted for in your plan. None of those things are going to prepare you to be successful or disruptive going forward in a rapidly changing environment where service and support has to go well beyond IT. And those are the strategic elements. You need to have your plan to figure out how do I align what IT is doing to the business so that I'm delivering value to the business. I would submit to you so you're delivering value to the customer, whoever that customer may be. How do I lower cost of ownership? It's imperative going forward to lower cost of ownership. And let me just pause right there and say, moving to the cloud doesn't necessarily lower your cost of ownership. Over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been this big myth in the industry that cloud means codeless, that cloud means easy. Neither one of those things are true. And I'm not saying that because I believe cloud's a bad thing. Cloud can absolutely be very good for an organization who has a cloud initiative and has the right expectations of what that's going to do for their organization. But lowering total cost of ownership is something that can be accomplished with a cloud solution or an on-premise solution when done the right way to solve the right problems and to position the organization in the right capacity. Shared services, expanding beyond IT, that is imperative. The clients that we work with who are the most progressive are rapidly bringing in other lines of business and delivering value to those. We are working with a client right now, and we are building a service catalog portal for this customer for one of their overseas operations for them to make accounting requests into their general accounting application. So they're using their ITSM solution to stand up a portal so that their offshore businesses can make the requests of accounting and then route those and perform the proper work tasks and have that traceability so those customers, those clients can get their work done. Having to do that and try to get with the accounting group historically has been hugely inefficient, especially when you start talking about different countries, different time zones, different languages. This portal is a perfect example of how an organization says we can do more to deliver service and provide support than IT for our organization. Simplifying administration, portability, again, we touched about those. Those are the key ones. What you need to figure out is which one of those are important to you. Does the tool that you're using today provide you those? And if it doesn't, don't become overwhelmed with the fact that, well, we've got so much invested in this tool already and we've been on it for so many years. Because what I would submit to you is executing on a plan, a modernization plan, can deliver benefits very, very fast, much faster than most clients realize. And when you look at some of what I would consider the leading solutions out there today, the reduction in the total cost of ownership to get you off of maybe a solution that doesn't fit your needs into something that's definitely more modernization ready, the TCO can be extremely, extremely compelling. So that brings me back to where we are today. Looks like I've got about 7 minutes or so. Hopefully this has been useful. I'm bringing my contact information back up on the screen. If we can open this up to questions. I'll look in the chat board. Matthew, I don't know if you can open the lines for any any questions if we can do that, but if not, certainly I'll look in the chat board here and we'll see if we have any questions. If you have some specific questions or something that is organization specific to you and your organization and would like to just reach out to me individually and talk about how we might be able to help with your modernization strategy, maybe even make some recommendations on some of the vendors and tools and things that we like and we think fit really well, we'd be happy to do that as well.
Hey, Bill, it's Matthew. I've got a couple of questions that did come in during your presentation.
Okay.
The first one you mentioned earlier, but I think it's for people that join late. Is this a recorded session, and how do I get access to it?
Yeah, so the session is recorded, and what we will do is we'll send out a copy of the link. We'll post it more than likely on our YouTube channel. You can access that through our website or directly from our YouTube channel. And we'll send a follow-up email to everybody who registered for the webinar, whether you were able to attend or not, and get you a copy of the link.
This next question came in, I think, before you gave some of these specifics, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You were talking about enterprise service management, and the question is, can you give some specific examples? You mentioned briefly HR and facilities, and then you touched on the education user, but is there, I guess let me rephrase the question then. What's the most likely group to try to tackle for enterprise service management, since you mentioned some of those others?
Well, so I would say that really varies depending on the industry. So let me give you one I didn't mention, which is really kind of compelling, and it's right at the cusp of what we're all dealing with today. So you think about organizations today. I'm just going to take Bank of America. So Bank of America has an online banking app that I use. I love it. I think it's a great app. I don't know, I'm crazy about the bank, but I think their app is awesome. So when you look at these companies and they put these apps out and they release them into the App Store and Google Play, and every single one of them has the ability to rate that app and to leave feedback and to say, I'm having a problem, oh, this thing stinks, it doesn't work on my Nexus 6 or whatever the case may be. So just think about the implications of that. I mean, you have a banking customer who is saying through an app portal, I tried this app, it doesn't work on my whatever phone. And how does an organization like Bank of America today have to support that, right? So this is really at the kind of essence of what we're talking about. So is that traditional IT? Well, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I can't answer that for Bank of America. But what I can certainly say is you want to capture that feedback and capture those issues that an end customer is putting in on the App Store, and what better place to capture them than inside your service management tool. So whether it's IT who ultimately owns that, or you have a separate group that deals with the apps, or maybe it's your DevOps group, there is this. Again, it's that fabric that I talked about earlier where service and support and application and mobility are all interweaving. Those are the examples I cited plus that one. It's just really exciting that everywhere you turn there's opportunities for IT to do non-ITIL-based service and support for the organization. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be Joe level 2 tech, who's the guy who gets the ticket and does the work. What it means is you have a tool and a platform that may allow many lines of business within the company to use that to provide superior service, superior support.
So, Bill, I got another question here. I'm going to remove the product name. They've mentioned the product they're using, but the product they're using today was sold to be codeless when they were doing their presentations, but they ultimately found out after the implementation they had to hire JavaScript developers to maintain a system that supposedly was supposed to be codeless. In your example, you talk about a codeless system. What does codeless mean to you compared to what they've experienced with this current vendor?
Well, so it's interesting. I talked to a CTO at one of the vendors one time, who is one of the vendors who says that they have a codeless solution, and they're one of the ones that tout that theirs is codeless. And it was funny what the CTO said. And it's very true. He said it takes a lot of code to make something codeless. And obviously what he means by that is there's a tremendous amount of logic and intelligence that you have to build into your code to allow someone to start dragging things visually and build processes and have it all work underneath the covers. So this is something that's still evolving in the industry. What I will tell you right now is that there are, I'll just name them. There are 3 vendors that I will say have elements of true. I will say this has. There are 3 vendors who have a true focus on codeless configuration today. I would say that those are Sharewell Software, HP, and Easy Vista. Those 3 now. I wouldn't necessarily say that all 3 of those have achieved the same level of codeless configuration. And there are other vendors who probably claim they have codeless, but if you're mentioning JavaScript, I would, guessing who that might be, I would say that that's not a codeless configuration type tool. The last point I would make on that is, look, depending on what you're going to do with the tool, today there's no tool that if you're going to say, I want my tool, I want my service management tool to automate the air traffic control operations at an airport, you're going to get into coding, right? So there's only so far that any of the tools today are going to be able to take codeless. But when you look at codeless configuration from a tool that also is built as a platform, that gives you a leg up, because now you have a tool that has codeless configuration and allows you to expand that tool without breaking it. So those 2, I think, really, and a lot of times go hand in hand with each other. Any other things, Matthew?
No, Bill, we have no other questions at this time.
Okay, well, we are right at 3 o'clock, so right at the top of the hour. I appreciate everybody who attended today. You'll see an email, like we said, with the recording. And again, my contact information is there. I'll leave it on the screen here for a little bit, but feel free to reach out to me. The other thing I would say is, if you are a client who would like us to provide this presentation live to your organization, to maybe a bigger audience at your organization, whether it's a tailored webinar for your organization or even an on-site meeting with some of your management team, we welcome that opportunity. And with that, appreciate everybody's time today, and have a great rest of your day.
Good.